The hook. Yes! Oh, that is a beast to end the day. Oh my God. All right, guys, there's fish number 5 from Holter. This is one of the smaller fish of the day. You can believe it. It's crazy. So in the 1970s, Holter Reservoir was well known as a really quality kokanee fishery and rainbow trout fishery, which it remains today. The rainbow trout fishery in here is exceptional. Just today alone, even though I was running mostly below where the rainbows were at, we caught well over 20 each that were pushing, many of them pushing in the 24, 26 inch range. But in the 1980s, that kokanee fishery just completely collapsed, just went away. Simultaneously, a yellow perch showed up in the reservoir in really large numbers, and their population exploded. And those perch grew to pretty substantial size, as they often do when they make an initial invasion into new waters, because there's lots of new resources to exploit. But the kokanee declined. I don't know if those were connected, but one of the most interesting hypotheses I've heard about the return of kokanee to Holter is through a series of events which is caused by the introduction of another species that caused what we call in ecological terms a trophic cascade. So in a trophic cascade, what happens is the introduction of some key species impacts the entire food web in the lake, either from the top down or the bottom up. In this case, it's going to be from the top down, because in the mid-90s, walleye were illegally introduced into Canyon Ferry Lake, which is far upstream, and they quickly worked their way downstream into Holter Reservoir, where their population exploded. And in fact, state record came out of this lake sometime in the early 2000s, I believe. Don't quote me on that. But what happened is, in this cascading impact of walleye introduction, is the walleye started feeding on kokanee as well as yellow perch. In fact, yellow perch and walleye occupy really similar habitat types. Yellow perch are more oriented towards the bottom, just like walleye and structure, whereas kokanee tend to be what I call more pelagic. They tend to occupy out towards deeper waters, and they tend to be away from the bottom of the lake. They're typically not bottom feeders, although they will go down there to feed on chironomids and such. So after the introduction of walleye, the yellow perch population just completely plummeted. In fact, they had to change the regulations to reduce fishing pressure on the perch, because they were worried about the collapse of the perch fishery, which is really, really popular for ice fishing, and also for shoreline fishing when the perch move up shallow. Even today, there were people at the boat ramp complaining that the perch hadn't moved up because the water temperatures were just too cold yet. But what's interesting is there's this hypothesis that the walleye, they were keying in really heavily on feeding on the perch, suppressed the perch population, which then freed up the kokanee population from competition, because yellow perch really represent a pretty significant threat to kokanee in two ways. One is when yellow perch are young, they compete with kokanee fry for the same food resources, like smaller plankton and also smaller invertebrates and freshwater shrimp and things like amphipods and daphnia and things like that. They're all competing for that same resource. And so what happens is, I'm going to throw another big ecological word at you, is yellow perch go through, as they develop, they go through what's known as an ontogenetic niche shift, which is just a fancy way of saying that the diet of young perch differs dramatically from that of more mature perch. And as perch get larger and mature, they really become much more predatory. They're feeding not just on insects, but small fish. And so there was this hypothesis that was proposed by one of the state fisheries biologists, that he thinks that the walleye introduction caused this suppression of yellow perch, which were competing with young kokanee, but also older perch were preying on kokanee. So yellow perch really occupy different parts of that food pyramid, if you were to think about the lake that way. And it caused the perch population to crash, freed up the kokanee, which are naturally spawning in this lake, and that fishery is now coming back. I wouldn't say they're super abundant or anything, which is why they're so large, right? Like, it's still just a low density wild population, but there's a lot of water here they can hide out in, which is why and it's a very productive lake, which is why they can just get incredibly large here. I mean, I had one fish, it was 21 inches long, but it was 13 inches where the dorsal fin, right in front of the dorsal fin. That's how thick that thing was. So really impressive. So it's really kind of a neat story. I don't know if it's true, it's just a hypothesis. It seems like a good one, founded in solid science, in my opinion, and it makes a lot of sense to me. The walleye are now kind of going past that initial phase where they all got big and huge, and this population's getting so abundant now that the average size is decreasing, which is a very typical pattern for invasion of a lot of fish. Perch do the same thing, they get big, they stunt. Walleye do the same thing, they come in, they get big, and then they stunt. Anyways, fun story, really interesting, some neat science playing into it. But hey, I would love to hear if you guys have any questions or alternative thoughts on why you think Kokanee are coming back to Holter. All right, I'll see you next time, and just remember, fish smarter, not harder. Bye, guys.